Okay, so we're talking about Jehoshaphat, and want to say right at the outset that Jehoshaphat is one of the good kings, and there's a lot to say about the good that Jehoshaphat did. But we've got today, and then we've got 2 more Sundays before this quarter's up, and I'm probably going to spend a lot of today talking about Jehoshaphat. We won't complete talking about him. We'll talk about him again next week. And so, let's see if I can just go forward here a couple of slides. You can see here we are on this timeline talking about Jehoshaphat. And so I'm going to have one Sunday to cover the rest of these kings, and that's clearly not going to happen. So we're going to, again, I hate to blast past Jehoshaphat because there's some excellent lessons for us. So we're going to spend some time talking about those lessons. By way of review, what we've been talking about, this is the period of the divided kingdom. Remember, we had the united kingdom under Saul, David, and Solomon, and then the kingdom split under Jeroboam and Rehoboam. The Bible tells us because of Solomon's sin, the kingdom was going to be split, and it was. And we've been talking about some of these early kings, both in the northern 10 tribes of Israel and the southern 2 tribes of Judah. One of the places I want to point out, because it comes into our story today, is Ramoth Gilead, okay? During the reigns of Ahab, who we've been talking about the last couple of Sundays, and one of the worst, if not the worst, king of Israel. And this is during his lifetime. This is during Jehoshaphat's lifetime. During this time, Ramoth Gilead, that should be part of the territory of the northern 10 tribes, it's being occupied, it's being owned, it's being governed by Aram, by what we would sometimes call Syria, which, by the way, I did a little bit of reading on that because the question came up last week. Why do we alternately refer to this as Aram or the king of Aram in Syria? And it is kind of interesting. Different commentators say different things on that. I didn't have a good answer for that, so I'll follow up this week. Different commentators say different things about that. Some say that Aram refers more to a territory or a region, the way you and I would talk about the Galatian region, but within that Galatian region there are individual countries, and that Aram refers more to the region and Syria, the country. But I found one very interesting again, because the question was asked last week, I'll just mention this. I found one really interesting reference that said, yeah, this was really known as Aram all through Old Testament times, and it wasn't until Alexander the Great that during that Hellenistic period that occurs between the Testaments, that it was part of Hellenism to rename that area Syria, and they called it Syria of the Seleucids. And that in hindsight, they started referring to this area as Syria, but really during Old Testament times, if they were talking to each other, they would have referred to this as Aram. So I just think that's interesting because it does kind of come up and we're going, oh, wait, all of our maps say Syria, and yet we read about the king of Aram. The important thing to note about this is this was Israel's northern border. Okay, this was the country on Israel's northern border, and as we talked about the last couple of weeks when we were talking about Ahab seemed to be constantly having this war going on with the king of Aram. Okay, so that's the period of time that we're in. Like I say, Ramoth Gilead is going to come into our story a little bit today, so we're going to talk just a little bit about that. I wanted you to know where that was. It's right up here, and during this period of time, the king of Aram is occupying, they've taken it from Israel, and they're owning Ramoth Gilead. Okay, so we mentioned that Jehoshaphat is one of the good kings, got a big plus there, and we talk about some of the good things that he did. He's really good. But interestingly, today, we're going to spend probably the majority of our time talking about some of the mistakes that Jehoshaphat made. Now, when we talk about him next week, we'll talk about more good things that he did. And we'll talk about some of the good things that he did today as well. But as it is, we're going to spend the majority of the time talking about one incident where he allies himself with Israel, and that causes him to do some things he shouldn't have done. Okay. Just again, by way of checking whether he's a good king or a bad king, there is Jehoshaphat right there. You can see he has a smiley face. And again, these smiley faces and frowny faces, and you've probably seen the timelines that have these. People put them that way because of the summary verse. The summary verse that I had in my title slide, which is 2 Chronicles 17, 3 through 4. The Lord was with Jehoshaphat because he followed the example of his father David's earlier days and did not seek the Baals, but sought God, the God of his father, followed his commandments, and did not act as Israel did. So overall, the scripture summarized Jehoshaphat as a very good king. So it's a shame that we're going to have to talk about some of the mistakes he made today. Okay, let's turn to 2 Chronicles chapter 17. And I'm going to look first at the first 3 verses, and then we have somebody else read for me. But look at just verses 1 and 2. 2 Chronicles chapter 17. Jehoshaphat, his son, then became king in his place. It's Asa's son. We've talked about Asa. We spent a couple of Sundays talking about Asa. He was a good king also. Jehoshaphat, his son, became king in his place and made his position over Israel firm. He placed troops in all the fortified cities of Judah and set garrisons in the land of Judah and in the cities of Ephraim, which Asa, his father, had captured. Okay. I'm using the New American Standard. It says he made his position over Israel firm. Somebody read that in the English Standard Version for me. That's verse 1. Somebody read 2 Chronicles 17 and 1 for me in the English Standard Version.
Jehoshaphat, his son, reigned in his place and strengthened himself against Israel.
Okay. I think that tells us, that gives us the story, I think, that's being conveyed a little bit better. And several of the translations render it very similar to what Mark just read. This isn't Jehoshaphat is just establishing himself in Judah, and Judah is being referred to kind of in the generic Israel here. No, this is talking about the northern 10 tribes. And as Mark just read, one of the first things that Jehoshaphat does here is he strengthens himself against the northern 10 tribes. So I want you to remember that, because I think that's a little bit telling of some of the things that are going to follow. That immediately upon becoming king, and we learn from 1 Kings that Jehoshaphat was 35 when he became, so the 35-year-old, he's 35 when he becomes king. Immediately, one of the first things that it says that we're told that he does is he strengthens himself against Israel. That kind of shows you what his concerns were. You know, when a new basketball coach, when a new president takes over, there's always a lot of attention on the first 100 days, right? What's this president going to do in the first 100 days? It's going to show us what his priorities are, what his concerns are. And I think that's a valid observation right here, to look at Jehoshaphat and see what we're told he immediately did. He strengthened his positions against Israel. Remember, they had built some fortified cities, and he refortifies those. And we're told that later, that he does some things to just really strengthen his defensive position against Israel. And I think that's important that we take note of that, because of some of the things that are going to follow. Now, chapter 17 is all kind of a glowing review of Jehoshaphat. We're going to pay attention to this. We're going to spend some time talking in chapter 17, because it sets us up for chapter 18, because chapter 18 is not so good for Jehoshaphat. Chapter 17, we're going to look at some of the great things that he did. In verse 4, he sought the God of his father and followed his commandments and did not act as Israel did. This is something that you know. What a great summary! If you had to have a summary verse about your reign, what a great thing to be said of you, that he followed God's commandments and he did not behave like Israel behaved. Remember, we've been talking for a couple of weeks about King Ahab. That's who's king right now. Ahab is king. And And one of the great things that Jehoshaphat does, and you have to know how bad Israel is, the last couple of weeks studying Ahab, right? One of the great things that Jehoshaphat does is he doesn't act like Israel. And we can appreciate that because we've spent a couple of weeks talking about Ahab. Remember that some of the things that Ahab wasn't enough that he just followed in Jeroboam's idolatrous worship of the calves, but he married Jezebel, whose very name means exalt Baal, and he set up a temple to Baal, set up an altar to Baal, and he worshiped Baal. That's what's going on in Israel. And we're told right here at the outset, in kind of the summary of Jehoshaphat's reign, that he didn't do like Israel did, and that's a good thing. But he sought the God of his father and followed in his commandments and did not act like Israel act. In verse 6, I really like this. He took great pride in the ways of the Lord and again removed the high places and the Asherim from Judah. Couple things to say about this. One, I can't, maybe one of you could think of a place, but I can't. Can you think of any other place where it's talking about the kings that this is how it describes their, some of the good things that they did or their good attitude? The idea of taking great pride in the things of the Lord, in the things of God. He took great pride in the ways of the Lord. This is something that he was proud of. And it's not just kind of a passive pride where he sits on his throne and he's proud of the fact that they're God's people. We're going to see here in a minute how that pride in the way of the Lord, how that was put into action. I'm just very impressed about some of the things that it says about Jehoshaphat here early in his reign. He took great pride. In the end of that verse, it says, he again removed the high places of the Asherim and Judah. Let me tell you right now, you're going to read other places that indicate that when Jehoshaphat died, there were still high places and there were still these idols. So, and we've seen that with several kings. Asa even had a program of removing the high places. Because some of these verses seem to be saying something different, clearly my understanding was not where it needed to be. So I consulted some of the commentators on this. Why does it say here that Jehoshaphat removed the high places, but elsewhere we can read that during Jehoshaphat's reign, and remember he reigned for 25 years, so he reigned from 35 to 60, it's a long period of time. We read about the high places and these idols still being in place. And I think one commentator summarized it nicely. Look, and this doesn't only apply to Jehoshaphat. You could see this with Asa and some of the other kings. Well, he removed the high places, and then you go to the end of his life, and the high places were still there. This applies to many of the kings. One commentator said, the thing that's happening here is they have these programs to go around and knock down these high places and get rid of them. But the commentator said, until you change the hearts and the minds of the people who are engaged in idol worship, over time, they're going to set those idols back up. So one of the things you need to do is not only knock down these high places, these places of idol worship, you need to re-educate the people. And here's where we're going to get to something that I believe Jehoshaphat really tried to do that. I mean, he seemed to understand this, that it's not enough just to knock these things down. Let's try to re-educate the people that there's only one true and living God. There's only one Yahweh. We need to educate the people. So look in verses 7 through 9, and I'm going to read those. Then in the third year of his reign, he sent his officials, Ben-Hail, Obadiah, Zechariah, Nathaniel, Micaiah, to teach in the cities of Judah. And with them the Levites, Shemaiah, I should have had somebody else read this, Nethaniah, Zebediah, Ashael, Shemiramoth, Jehonathan, Adonijah, Tobiah, and Tobadonijah, the Levites, and with them were Elishama and Jehoram, the priests. Okay, that's a mouthful, but what I want you to see is he sent officials, he sent Levites, and he sent priests to do what? Look in verse 9. They taught in Judah, having the book of the law of the Lord with them, and they went throughout all the cities of Judah and taught among the people. To me, and I might be over-extrapolating, I don't think I am, and if I don't have the motives exactly right, I can still see that the actions are good. To me, Jehoshaphat seems to understand that I got to do more than just, sending my guys around to knock down these altars to these false gods. I've got to do more than, trying to physically eradicate the high places because they just get built up again. I need to educate the people in the law. What a great program. He sends people out, and he sends his officials, the Levites, the priests out with the book of the law to teach in the cities. Now, I'm going to jump forward to somebody that we're clearly not going to get an opportunity to cover in this quarter, but contrast this, what's happening here, with sending people out with the law, to what happened during Josiah's reign. Somebody tell me what I'm talking about. What happened during Josiah's reign? Am I being...
rediscover the book of the law, basically. It had been forgotten about, so clearly is temporary.
Yeah, everybody hear that? In our... we were talking about this, I think, in our last Thursday night, including this was the week before, but during Josiah's reign, remember, this is one of the big events of Josiah's, they're kind of renovating the temple, and so the workmen find the book of the law, and they bring it to Josiah, and Josiah starts reading it. He just starts weeping. How did we lose this? And God has compassion on Josiah because he cried when he read the book of the law. But I think it's a marker of how far they came. Adam just said we could see kind of the temporary nature of what's going on here with Jehoshaphat. He's trying to educate the people. He's sending people out with the book of the law. But guess what? By the time we get to Josiah, who's arguably one of the best kings of Judah, of the southern tribes, when we get to Josiah, the book of the law had been lost. It had gone into disuse. It had been forgotten about, and Josiah weeps when he reads it. It's just, to me, a very stark contrast between what Jehoshaphat's trying to do here and then bookend that with, toward the end of the kingdom of Judah when Josiah reigns. He's the last good king of Judah, and the law had been lost. Yes, ma'am?
I was going to say that, I don't know if we're kind of starting to see that again today. We had all those young college people that had gathered in that chapel for days or weeks, I don't know exactly the time frame, singing and praising the Lord. And then now we have the Jesus Revolution movie. So, when I talk to some young people, they feel there's kind of a movement, but how many of them are singing Christian songs and know God's word?
Yeah, boy, that's a great point. And you could get me talking about that for the next half hour, and we won't even cover Jehoshaphat. But let me just say, you made me think of Romans 10 and verse 1. Does anybody know what Romans 10 and verse 1 says, what Paul says in Romans 10 and verse 1? It says, "Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved. For I bear them record that they have a zeal of God," right? That's what she's just described, that this zealousness. They have a zeal of God, but not according to knowledge. Paul was concerned about Israel. Yeah, they're zealous, but it's not according to knowledge. And your point is, I think what I'm hearing you say is we see that today as well. It's a very good point. Thank you. Hand up over here. Yes, sir.
I think it's really interesting talking about Josiah, the impact that reading the law can have on the heart, specifically the impact it had on his heart. But we read the next few verses that we haven't gotten to yet, the impact that it has on the surrounding nations.
Oh, yeah.
And it reminds me of a verse I really like, Deuteronomy 4, verses 5 and 6.
Mm-hmm.
And it says that when they keep the law,
Yeah, that's awesome. That's just such a great reference, Nick, because we're going to see, just like you said, that when they're following God, when they're out there, trying to do what the law says, Jehoshaphat has this program of teaching the law. All of a sudden, it says fear, dread falls on all the nations around them, and they know we can't touch them because, and I think it's implied, because God is with them. We cannot touch them. And it's an important point. I want to talk about it in just a minute, a little bit more. Thanks for bringing that up, Nick. But this is great. I love these points. I mean, I'll just throw this in also. David, in kind of probably examining his life, he says, how does a young man cleanse his ways? And he says, by taking heed thereto, according to thy word. You want to cleanse your ways? Follow God's word. That's what David reflecting on this says. That's Psalms 119 and verse 9. Okay, so here they are. They have this program in verse 10. That's what Nick was just referencing. Now the dread of the Lord was on all the kingdoms of the lands which were around Judah, so that they did not make war against Jehoshaphat. And then in verse 11, some of the Philistines brought gifts of silver as tribute to Jehoshaphat. The Arabians also brought flocks, and it goes into everything that was brought, and it starts going into the size of the various armies that Jehoshaphat had at his command. But I get a little bit tickled that the Philistines are bringing tribute here. Who are the Philistines? They're like the perennial enemy of Israel, right? They're David and Goliath. They're the ones that Samson's worried against. They're just perennially, the Philistines, because they didn't completely wipe them out like they should have when they first went into the promised land, the Philistines are the enemy of Israel. But even the Philistines see what's going on here with Jehoshaphat, and during this period of time, they are paying tribute to Jehoshaphat. That to me, that says something about the Lord being with Judah at this time, as Jehoshaphat was being this good king and doing everything and trying to make these reforms and trying to teach people the law. The Lord was with them, and nobody could touch them, and they knew that. Instead of making war against them, they were bringing tribute to them. Okay. Some of the Philistines brought silver and gold as tribute to Jehoshaphat. The Arabians also, verse 12. So Jehoshaphat grew greater and greater, and he built fortresses and store cities in Judah. And I'm not going to read the rest of the chapter because it talks about kind of his wealth or his strength and all of these. I think the implied message is all of these things are because they were following God right now. They were doing what God wanted them to do. So, I said at the outset, we're going to spend the majority of time talking about some mistakes that Jehoshaphat made. It's going to stark contrast to what we've just been saying, right? Go forward to, the bottom of my slide there. The result of Jehoshaphat seeking God was that the dread of the Lord was on all the kingdoms of the lands which are around Judah, so that they did not make war against Jehoshaphat. Verse 10. I think that's something I'd like you to remember as we kind of progress to this next slide. Okay. In chapter 18, Jehoshaphat allies himself with Ahab. And we're going to look at that. We're going to look at some of the consequences of that. We're not going to be able to talk about all the consequences. That's why we're going to probably have to talk about Jehoshaphat a little bit more next week to really get into the longer term, further reaching consequences. This is a terrible thing. Remember how bad we talked about Ahab being the last couple of weeks? Jehoshaphat goes and allies himself with Ahab. Look at chapter 18, verse 1. Now Jehoshaphat had great riches and honor, and he allied himself by marriage to Ahab. If you can, flip over to 1 Kings 22. 1 Kings doesn't talk a lot about Jehoshaphat, but frequently, and if you go search out kind of Jehoshaphat, you'll see a lot of sermons out there on the internet, and the title of the sermon will be Jehoshaphat Made Peace with Ahab. And that's what it says in 1 Kings chapter 22. 1 Kings 22, verse 41. Verse 41. Now Jehoshaphat, the son of Asa, became king over Judah. Pardon me. In the 4th year of King Ahab, king of Israel. Jehoshaphat was 35 years old when he became king, and he reigned 25 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Azubah, the daughter of Shilhi. He walked in all the ways of Asa his father, did not turn away from it, doing right in the sight of the Lord. However, the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burnt incense on high places. Verse 44, Jehoshaphat also made peace with the king of Israel. And then it goes on. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoshaphat and all his might which he showed, how he warred, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the king of Judah? So not very much is said about Jehoshaphat in 1 Kings. But there's this verse that says, and he made peace with the king of Israel during his days. And without any other context, you're thinking, oh, this might be a good thing. Maybe this is a good thing that he made peace with the king of Israel. And what we're going to spend the rest of our time this morning talking about is, no, this was not a good thing. This was a terrible thing with terrible repercussions, with just long-lasting repercussions for Judah. Okay, terrible. And I want you to ask yourselves as we go through the rest of this material, who's influencing who here, right? I heard, I was growing up, lots of arguments from peers in the church that, I can participate in this because I be somewhere where I shouldn't have been, be around people who I shouldn't be around, because who knows, I might have a positive influence on them. And I don't know if that's what Jehoshaphat was thinking, but I want you to ask yourselves, who influenced who here? Okay, when I used to teach, young high school students, I used to do this illustration in talking about allying ourselves with evil, or being unequally yoked to an unbeliever. And that verse, we're going to bring that verse up here in a minute. But I used to do this illustration where I'd have the young teenager, stand up on one of the pew chairs, and I'd say, okay, grab my hand, we're going to be yoked here. Now, you try to pull me up. And they lift and pull and pull, and they lift and pull, and they wouldn't be able to go, okay, now I'm going to try to pull you down. And it's just so much easier to pull that person down than it is for them to pull me up. And I think that you're going to see some of that here with Ahab and Jehoshaphat as well. Okay, back in Chronicles, we learn from 1 Kings, he made peace with the king of Israel, but this is not a good thing. Let's see. He allied himself with Ahab by marriage. And it doesn't tell us right here who or how or when that happened, but if you turn to chapter 21, just turn a couple of chapters ahead, you'll see it. In 2 Chronicles 21, verses 1 through 6. Go ahead and just read 2 Chronicles 21, verses 1 through 6. It's going to tell us what this marriage alliance was. Also, we're going to see some of the repercussions of this alliance. Somebody read chapter 21, verses 1 through 6, 2 Chronicles.
Jehoshaphat slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David, and Jehoram his son reigned in his place. He had brothers, the sons of Jehoshaphat, Azariah, Jehiel, Zechariah, Azariah, Michael, and Shephatiah. All these were the sons of Jehoshaphat, king of Israel. Their father gave them great gifts of silver, gold, and valuable possessions, together with fortified cities in Judah, but he gave the kingdom to Jehoram, because he was the firstborn. When Jehoram had ascended the throne of his father and was established, he killed all his brothers with the sword, and also some of the princes of Israel. Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. And he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, as the house of Ahab had done. For the daughter of Ahab was his wife, and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord.
Okay. Thank you, Nick. So that explains this alliance by marriage. he had his own son marry the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. His son's mother-in-law was Jezebel. We talked about, some of the evil that Jezebel did. His son's father-in-law was Ahab. And, talk about not a good match for your son. Okay, this is a terrible match. And we already saw what Nick just read. It already has had repercussions. As soon as Jehoshaphat's son becomes king, what's one of the first things he does? Has all of his brothers killed, which that's the kind of thing that we talk about happening in the kingdom of Israel. Remember, in Israel, they just keep changing dynasties, and we go through, all of these dynasties, but we don't expect that kind of behavior with the southern two tribes. And yet, you've got Ahab's son-in-law and Jezebel's son-in-law on the throne of Judah after Jehoshaphat dies. Just some of the terrible consequences, and we see that's the marriage that's being talked about in chapter 18, verses 1 and 2. Now, again, you've got this verse in 1 Kings that we see kind of standing by itself without much context. We don't really know what's going on, and it said that Jehoshaphat made peace with Israel during his reign. And one of the things, at least for me, that immediately pops into my mind is the Beatitudes. Matthew, the 5th chapter. What does it say about peacemakers? Matthew 5 and verse 9. Yeah, Matthew 5 and verse 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God. Now, I could spend probably the rest of the time talking about why this isn't that. Okay? When Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers, and that they will be called the sons of God, we're not talking about making peace with sin, with making peace with evil. We should never have peace with sin or peace with evil. And essentially, that's what Jehoshaphat does here. That's what we're going to do. Remember, everything we said about Ahab and Jezebel, they are evil people involved in Baal worship. They've set up a temple to Baal. There's an altar to Baal. There's all these prophets of Baal that eat at Jezebel's table. And in verse 2, we see some years later, this is chapter 18, verse 2, Jehoshaphat went down to visit Ahab at Samaria. And Ahab slaughtered many sheep and oxen for him and the people who were with him, and induced him to go up, and the people who were with him, and Ahab induced Jehoshaphat to go up against Ramoth Gilead. Okay. So we actually read a little bit more about this in Kings, a few more details about this occurrence in 1 Kings. We're not going to turn over there right now. But so I guess got a lot of questions here. Jehoshaphat goes down to his in-laws and says, hey, my son's married to your daughter, and he goes down there. And you can see Jehoshaphat's thinking, hey, we're all sons of Abraham. Let's just all get along. But first of all, I would like to ask the question, it says at the beginning of verse 2, some years later he went down to visit Ahab. Isn't Ahab to the north of Judah? Why does it say he went down? Yeah, heard several people say it. Any direction you leave Jerusalem from is down, okay? Jerusalem's on a hill, and don't ever let that kind of throw you in the scriptures. When you leave Jerusalem, you go down, even if you go north. Jerusalem's up higher than everything around it. It's on a hill. When you leave Jerusalem, you go down. He went to Samaria, he went down. And it's such a great metaphor, right? Because he did. He went down to Samaria. Remember, in Samaria, we've got Baal worship going on and all these prophets of Baal. Okay, he went down. Ahab slaughtered many sheep. So Ahab makes this big feast for him. And Ahab, king of Israel, said to Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, will you go with me against Ramoth Gilead? This is verse 3. And he said, I am as you are, and my people as your people, and we will be with you in battle. Echoes of Naomi and Ruth, your people are my people, and I'll be with you. And it he's putting his arms around Ahab and letting Ahab drive this show, and he should be having nothing to do with this evil man. It's not just me saying that. We're going to see where God delivers this message to Jehoshaphat too, that he should have nothing to do with them. Okay, somebody read verses 4 through 11 for me. Chapter 18, verses 4 through 11.
And Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, "Inquire first for the word of the Lord." And then the king of Israel gathered the prophets together, 400 men, and said to them, "Shall we go to battle against Ramoth Gilead, or shall I refrain?" And they said, "Go up, for God will give it into the hand of the king." But Jehoshaphat said, "Is there not here another prophet of the Lord of whom we may inquire?" And the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, "There is yet one man by whom we may inquire of the Lord, Micaiah the son of Imlah, but I hate him, for he never prophesies good concerning me, but always evil." And Jehoshaphat said, "Let not the king say so." Then the king of Israel summoned an officer and said, "Bring quickly Micaiah the son of Imlah." Now the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat the king of Judah were sitting on their thrones, arrayed in their robes, and they were sitting at the threshing floor at the entrance of the gate of Samaria, and all the prophets were prophesying before them. And Zedekiah the son of Chenaanah made for himself horns of iron and said, "Thus says the Lord, with these you shall push the Syrians until they are destroyed." And all the prophets prophesied so and said, "Go up to Ramoth Gilead and triumph. The Lord will give it into the hand of the king."
Okay. There's just a couple of points I want you to get from the section that Adam just read. And probably the biggest point is that Jehoshaphat is smart enough. Again, this makes you question, well, how could he make such mistakes? Because he shows some intelligence here. Jehoshaphat knows the difference between these 400, I'll call them yes men, these 400 prophets who are telling Ahab exactly what he wants to hear. But Jehoshaphat knows the difference between them and a true prophet of God. And that's just interesting to me. All of these prophets say, yeah, go, 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 go. But there's something different about them, and Jehoshaphat sees that, and he says in verse 6, "Is there not yet a prophet of the Lord?" It's like saying, yeah, I've heard what these 400 have to say, but they're not prophets of the Lord. Okay? They're saying what you want them to say. Makes you think of what Paul said in, what is it, first time I get later here in my notes, 1 Timothy, that time will come when men, Paul, the time will come where they will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance with their own desires. That's a warning for me and you today. 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 3. That's a warning for me and you. Paul says the time will come. He's looking forward, not backward. And yet this is exactly what Ahab's doing. He's got these 400 men who tell him exactly what go up. Okay. Verse 12, then the messenger who went to summon Micah spoke to him, saying, "Behold, the words of the prophet are uniformly favorable to the king, so please let your word be like one of them and speak favorably." I'm going to skip ahead in the interest of time. Look at, let's see, skip down to verse 15. Then the king said to him, "How many times must I adjure you to speak to me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord?" This is Micaiah. So he said, "I saw all Israel scattered on the mountains like sheep which have no shepherd. And the Lord said, These have no master. Let each of them return to his house in peace." Then the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, "Did I not tell you that he would not prophesy good concerning me, but evil?" Micaiah said, "Therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and the host of heaven standing on his right and on his left. And the Lord said, Who will entice Ahab, the king of Israel, to go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead?" And one said this, while another said that. Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord and said, "I will entice him." And the Lord said to him, "How?" He said, "I will go and be a deceiving spirit in the mouths of all his prophets." Then he said, "You are to entice him and prevail also. Go and do so. Now therefore, behold, the Lord has put a deceiving spirit in the mouth of these your prophets, for the Lord has proclaimed disaster against you." Then Zedekiah, the son of Chenaanah, came near and struck Micaiah on the cheek and said, "How did the Spirit of the Lord pass from me to speak to you?" Micaiah said, behold, you will see on that day when you enter an inner room to hide yourself. It's really interesting. One of these false prophets comes and smacks Micaiah and said, you know, I had the word of the Lord. You know, how did it pass to you to say something else? And Micaiah, after being smacked, says, you're going to see how this transpires, and you're going to be hiding yourself when it does. And then, we'd like to see kind of the fulfillment of that prophecy. We don't. This is the last we read of this Zedekiah and this Micaiah. The king of Israel said, take Micaiah and return him to Amon, the governor of the city, to Joash, the king's son, and say, thus says the king, put this man in prison and feed him sparingly with bread and water until I safely return. Micaiah said, if you indeed return safely, the Lord has not spoken to me. Okay, so Micaiah prophesies that Ahab's going to fall, and that's exactly what happens. What I want you to see in verse 28 is that Ahab and Jehoshaphat completely ignore Micaiah's prophecy, which is really a head scratcher for me, because Jehoshaphat was smart enough to see that these 400 did not have the word of the Lord. To him, they were false prophecies. He said, is there anyone here with the word of the Lord? And Ahab says, yeah, there's one, but he always says bad things about me. And they go get him. And then Jehoshaphat, along with Ahab, don't listen to what Micaiah says. Yes, sir, Derek.
Mackey even says, yep, you got it. Go after it for the first time.
Yeah.
And you think Ahab, but this shows Ahab, he doubts his own 400 too.
Oh, yeah.
I hate that guy, you know, and I
Yeah.
want to know the truth.
Yeah.
And then he begs him, look, you're pulling one over on me. Tell me the truth. Okay, you're going to get crushed.
Yeah.
Right? And how many people today, that's the way we operate. If there's something we don't like, we just ostrich it, and then we're good.
Oh, yeah.
If I don't know it.
Yeah.
And so you can see that inner doubt now, because he got the answer the first time and could have run with it.
Yeah.
My 400 and Mr. Truth Teller both said the same thing. He's like, how about telling me legit?
Yeah. Yeah, I know you're not telling me the truth because you said something good and you never say anything good. Yeah, that's awesome. There's so much to say about this, but remember at the beginning of class, I asked you to think about the first thing that Jehoshaphat did when he became king. It says he strengthened his position against Israel. So I told you we wouldn't have time to finish up Jehoshaphat this morning. We've got more to say about this. But here you are seeing Jehoshaphat ally himself with the northern church, ally himself with Ahab and Jezebel and all of that idolatry going on. And, you know, I think back to that first thing that we read about him, that he was worried about his northern border, the northern border of Judah. He's worried about Israel. He's strengthening that position. And, you know, if I can only make peace with Ahab, then I won't have to worry about my northern border. It wasn't worth it. And we're going to talk about that more next week. We're going to talk about the fact that Ahab does die in battle, just as Micaiah prophesied. And we're going to talk about Jehoshaphat being rebuked for this. Okay, got more to say about this next week. Thank you very much. The comments were fantastic.